So you have to ask yourself, is it this important for me to bring up right this second? So when the conflict happens, meaning a condition wasn't met or a boundary was crossed, you got to ask yourself, is this something that I need to address immediately? All right. Or is this something that I can time my response? And that's most of the time, okay, it's a timed response. There's very few things where you have to immediately, set a hard boundary and react. And usually when you're reacting, you're not going to be calibrated. All right. You want to be proactive and not reactive when you respond to these friction points. Okay. And so that's just as best as you can. Now, if you have to have an immediate reaction, I'll tell you how to do that proactively here in a second. But most of you guys get your little anxieties up in a bunch, and girls too, right? And then it's like, I have to get an attitude, act like I'm mad, give them the silent treatment, say something angry, or say a definitive boundary statement right now. And then it sets the tone for, let's say, the rest of an evening or the rest of an interaction as a negative tone. And so now you throw off this magic ratio. And I'll tell you what, as an assertive, dominant guy, I am guilty of this 10 times over. This is one thing I didn't do a lot in some of my past relationships, you know what I mean, that I do now. Okay. Which is, think about my timing. So even if your game, it's not like my game was bad, right? It's so even when you're good with women, this is something, and you have good communication skills, this is something you can really, screw up. And so not timing something appropriately and being reactive, being overly assertive because you're an assertive person and you don't allow for boundary crossings, but in the wrong time and in the wrong place. And you just create a conflict where there didn't need to be one. And this is an interesting comment, game without red pill awareness is a killer. This is true. Also, I would say the red pill awareness, if we're talking about it, and awareness of, we'll say, evolutionary psychology principles, right? Awareness of these principles without game is also a killer. Either one, you have to have game being communication skills with your partner. Okay. And so you have to ask yourself, is it this important for me to bring up right this second? And so let's talk about the immediate. Okay. So this is where there's a reasonable assertiveness. All right. You have to have a reasonable assertiveness and then right now action. Let's say you're hanging out with her and she's hanging out, with a girl, it's a girlfriend, and maybe so there's a few people hanging out, and her friend references some ex, and she's laughing and referencing that ex, but it kind of doing it in such a way where it's it's of a sexual nature, but it's not overt. It's not oh yeah, you banged me so good or whatever, but maybe it's referencing some sex in some sort of a way where it's just not very comfortable and it's not respectful to you being her current partner. It puts that other guy in a positive sexual light, and doing that in front of you and doing that, even behind your back while she's with you, then calls to question your sexual power and viability in her life. Right. So let's say she does that and it's clearly a boundary cross. I mean, it's a boundary. You don't feel comfortable with that. You could blow up on her and say, oh yeah, so why don't you go f them then, or whatever. Right. You could be like that, and you could create a scene in front of all the friends, and you could react to that. Right. But that wouldn't be the right way to do it. And so maybe that is, if it's just a passing comment and it's over with, your first assessment is, do I need to address this right now in front of everybody? And the way that my emotions are telling me to address it, right? Your emotions could be telling you to shit down her neck, but that's not at all appropriate, Now, what she said was inappropriate, but her being inappropriate is not permission, doesn't grant you permission to also be inappropriate. If it's over, like she says the comment and the exchange, and then they're on to the next thing, maybe in your immediate reaction, you need to put this in the memory bank and then bring it up later, not with everybody there. Okay. And this is when a well-timed response is. So you probably need a well-timed response. Okay. So then what do you do in the moment? Well, in the moment, you have to act indifferent to that comment and to what happened. And you have to focus on the positive aspects of the rest of the evening and the night. And you compartmentalize what was said and put it on the back burner. This is very hard to do for a lot of you, because you are not as strong in your inner game. Okay. You need to be able to do this, and you can do this when you don't use your partner as a point of validation for your own, we'll say, self-esteem and self-worth and identity. But most guys and most women use their partner as that point of validation. It's actually okay for the woman to use you as that point of validation. All right. But you as a guy, you should not. And I say that because you're the masculine energy in the relationship and you're leading the relationship. All right. There's a masculine energy, and you bring it as the guy. That means that she cannot be your validation point. All right. She can be someone you care about, that you have all the love feelings for. She can love you. You could be happy when she says all the good things about you, and you could, take that to heart to mean that she's emotionally drawn to you, right, and happy with you. But that's not what makes you the man that you are. Okay. And so you need to be able to separate the two. And when she does something that calls it to question, you need to be able to compartmentalize that and deal with that at the right time, if it's not the appropriate time to deal with that. Does she see you as a sexual power in her life? Does she not? Either way, it doesn't make you less or more. How you handle it does, right? So you got to ask yourself, is this something I need to handle? Now, let's say this continues, the discussions continue to happen, and she's talking, and now we're crossing into lines of disrespect, because she's not overtly just being like, oh yeah, this guy had a bigger dong than Bill over here, ha ha ha, and he made me come more than this guy, like, it's not like overt like that, right? But let's say just she keeps going down memory lane of all the dudes she's banged, or this situation with this guy and with her friend, with you standing right there and other people around. You probably need to say something now. Now you do need an immediate response, and you're now in public, and it might be embarrassing to both her and you. But here's the thing, you have to assert a boundary, right? That's where boundary enforcement has to happen. And if she gets to be embarrassed and look like an idiot and a bad chimp, that's her consequence, right? For crossing a boundary in the manner in which she's doing it. And she's giving you not much of a response. And guaranteed, if you have an immediate response that's appropriate and calibrated, it will embarrass her. She may be mad at you for a few days, but she probably won't do that again, right? And so that's where you might need to say, hey, look, I don't really want to go down memory lane of guys that you've banged in the past while we're sitting here in front of a bunch of people. All right, I'm not really cool with that. So I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to come back, and then hopefully that conversation is going to be different. And then you get up and you go. You use the bathroom, you come back. She might be mad at you, okay, and whatever, or she might be uncomfortable, but then you go right back to normal. You go and we'll deal with this later. If she wants to continue to escalate a conflict in public, then you can just say, listen, I'm not going to do this in public with you. You're just crossing a boundary, and it's not okay. We can leave, or I can leave, and you can get a ride home. But, I'm not going to keep doing this, right? So these are boundary enforcement things, right? So when it's immediate response, especially a public one, usually can be like, it can escalate very quickly. You de-escalate as best as you can by being the reasonable force in that. But this is where you're not yelling. You can be assertive, right? And you need to do that. You need to do that appropriately. But obviously, this is going to create a massively negative experience, which will take a lot of positives to counteract it. And yes, it may be her fault by crossing those boundaries, but you're in the relationship. It's not about whose fault it is. So this is something that will probably create this negative experience, and then there'll be further conflict afterwards or whatever. depending on how good she is at handling conflict, right? It's going to create some discomfort. It's going to create, not a good appearance in front of everybody else, which does matter in your relationship, especially to her. And so these are things that could need to be reserved, especially if it's something in public like that, right? But again, you can't allow a boundary to just continue to be crossed, though, and you to accept it, because then that becomes a new boundary. So you can't accept the boundary cross, but there's see how there's a calibration here. She doesn't say one comment and then I just come down on her like a hammer in front of everybody. Maybe she says this one thing and it passes, and then I just let it go and we talk later, right? And then, or maybe that one thing that she said was really not as big of a deal as it sounded to me. And as I had time to think about it, I think, you know what? I'm seeing I don't need to bring this up at all. And it's a non-issue. You see what I mean? So time can give you the space to rationally process the stuff. So you're not just reacting emotionally. All right. So your steps for immediate is you take a deep breath. All right. And there's a way of breathing to calm yourself down. Make sure you're in a calm state and give yourself a tactical pause. All right. But that's pronounced. I won't do it in a way that people notice it. All right. A double inhale and an exhale, maybe two of those. And I take a pause and I just sort of think. And what am I thinking about? I'm asking myself, is this something I need to respond to right now? Or is this something that I can wait on? So when you have that emotional reaction in the immediate, you tactically pause and you assess. Unless somebody is getting shot or murdered or kidnapped or something, you know what I mean? You don't need an immediate reaction that's going to get you in trouble or bring unnecessary negative conflict to your relationship. They're going to have to try to counteract later. All right. Some of you guys lack emotional self-control. I have been in different times in my life. I've been more of an immediate reactor because that's part of just being sort of a little bit too domineering sometimes. So that's how you handle that kind of stuff, is you state a boundary. Now, I didn't say, if she were to continue to create a conflict over it or continue to cross that boundary, well, then there's going to be consequence. And that consequence is usual removal of your time, attention, energy. Okay, so that's usually what it is you've stated the boundary and she continues, you just remove it. Maybe you just straight up leave. You're her ride home. So what? She has Uber on her phone. All right, if it's that bad, right? Or maybe you say to her girlfriend, hey, are you cool to drive her home? She's like, well, yeah, why? All right, I'm gonna go. I'll see you guys later. And you leave. You see what I mean? Like, this is a boundary enforcement at this point. And then we'll get into what happens after, but that's how you handle it immediately. You don't yell, you don't scream, you don't lose control, you don't have a public argument. You see what I mean? You don't pull her in a public argument, which would include pulling her aside and yelling at each other in the corner or outside or in the truck, you're in your vehicle. You know what I'm saying? While everybody else knows you're having this fight. All right. It's just a boundary enforcement. And here's the change of behavior. And then if that doesn't change, or if the conflict continues, then it's action, which is usually removal of time or attention. Hey, we can leave where I'm leaving, which is it, And so if she can't have now a reasonable conversation, which we'll get into the conflict management part, then there isn't one until she can. But you're just not going to let that boundary continue to be crossed, right? Or that condition continue to be not met. And so that's that.